Hello, hello, hello. Welcome in. If you are new here, I'm Kinyo. I'm a writer and a world builder, and I'm creating my originally long-form fantasy world. Today, we'll discuss what are the pillars of a fantasy story, and this is the world map. So, the world I'm creating isn't totally detached from Earth. There are similar patterns, familiar climate, logic, geography. Um, Things that make it feel grounded. However, there are forces and systems that don't mirror anything that we know here on Earth. So it's a world shaped by magic, which some of it is recognizable at first glance, but as the more you look at it, the more foreign it starts becoming. So from the beginning, I knew that a map created for this world couldn't feel synthetic. It needed to have the authority of archival cartography, something that looked a little bit like it had endured for centuries. But it also had to be built with more modern discipline and precision. So I was looking to have a map that was sharp, that was scalable, and that was internally consistent. Before designing anything, I studied fantasy cartography extensively. So I had a look at what gives a map authority versus what makes it feel decorative. And this was for me about identifying principles to scope for my own map. So these are examples of what I studied. As you can see, there's a lot of different variations. Um, some of the of what I see in here I really like. Other things I want to avoid. So I was looking at analyzing line work, um, topography, border treatment, coastline density. So this made me kind of really establish what I liked and what I didn't. And it helped me shape the concept in my head of what the visuals of a map would have to be. So from that research, I defined the direction. So my fantasy world map had to feel rustic. Um, it had to look weathered, so like it's been used and it's been passed across generations. I wanted to also have the archival look. So in terms of what's actually displayed on the map, I wanted to have a lot of detail, like it was made by someone that knew what they were doing. It also had to feel hand-drawn to kind of fit into the high fantasy world. And I wanted to also make it a little bit organic. So all in all, make the concept very artisanal. That was what I was ultimately looking for. So it had to also remain a little bit disciplined as well, so that it was not only scalable but precise, and it could be easily identifiable by anyone that could look into it, could really understand what they were looking at. So I began with um, the landmass itself. So when I started writing this story, I was using Procreate on my iPad and kind of drawing things by hand. Um, and that allowed me to kind of be free flowing, kind of think as I went along. And here's a little bit of an example of how I started. So very, little basic coastline lines. Nothing really in depth, but what I wanted was the lines to be very, very varied, and I was making the image very big so that I could zoom in and still have a little bit of detail. So working this way allowed the coastline to retain some irregularity, some rhythm, while still being visually appealing, even though it was created digitally, of course. So I avoided symmetry, as you can see, as much as possible. Every curve needed to be as irregular as possible, a little bit random as well, as the coastline normally is. And so really early stage, I defined the geographical spine of where the story of my fantasy world was going to begin. Okay, so after that, I thought I need to develop what's going to be in the map. So, I kind of was shooting in many directions, from writing, some designing um, mountains to rivers to locators. I was trying to not really aim for realism, but more for hand-drawn, rustic feel. That's and that's how I kind of developed. But pretty soon I uh, stopped fully writing, designing mountains and lakes and landmarks, and went back to focusing on the structural integration of the map. So once I had enough mountains, I was positioning them just to see how it looked, kind of testing out how everything looked, what I liked and what I didn't like. There was a lot of trial and error at this point for me as well, and I played around a lot because I was kind of creating things as I went along. So it was very enjoyable for me to kind of just let my imagination flow, really. And then I added a few location. I created a location marker, as you can see here, for locations that I thought was going to be important for the start of my story. Um, I'm trying to use the positions of where things would be important in the story. Um, but I was building it together with the story development. Um, so then I proceeded to think about how can I make this a little bit more appealing than just having a black and white visuals. So I started studying different brushes inside Procreate, to kind of give it a little bit of color and to paint what I had, um, and then kind of painted around and kind of studied a little bit about land and sea, what kind of colors I wanted to see, and then in the end I kind of joined it all together and created my starting region of the world map. Again, everything inside Procreate, with colors, with a little bit of vegetation as well. I wanted to kind of see how it looked with some mountains. Again, really early stages, really basic stuff. Then with colors again, I introduced the location markers again to see how they looked. Again, as I was designing it, they were the visual kind of grew into different shapes. Into still have this area here, which is the original start of the story, and then I moved on to a little bit more as I progressed. However, there was a massive issue for me, which is no matter how big I made my frame that I was drawing in, the more I kind of zoomed in, the more I saw that uh, it started getting pixelated. So therefore, I was losing quality. So if I ever wanted to print like a really big print of any detail, I wouldn't have that possibility because it was pixelated. So it was losing really, really detail. And that was a little bit of a concern. But at the time, I was just kind of progressing and trying to be original and trying to do my own thing and learning at the same time. So it wasn't a big problem at the time, but it was something in the back of my head that I had to kind of fix. The other problem that I came across was long-term consistency. So because I was starting to write a concept for a fantasy story, so I had a big issue, which was if I write a story now that I want to develop later, let's imagine that it has a book or two, three, and if I'm only focusing on just a little bit of the world that I'm doing now, I can fall into the trap of later on in the story, I'm writing developments that could invalidate part of the story now, similar to what happens with Lord of the Rings and the eagles that could have flown Frodo all the way to Mount Doom from the beginning of the story, and therefore kind of invalidating the whole story and the whole journey. This is not criticized. J.R.R. Tolkien is absolutely um, um, brilliant, but I just wanted to kind of get away from learn from that and try and kind of make sure that my story had consistency from the beginning to end. This means that I had to really think about the world as a whole rather than just the little bit that I wanted to tell now, right? So I had to kind of really understand what was beyond the pages and what was beyond the story that I was writing to really kind of ground everything that was going into my visuals. So, to address that first point, I wanted my characters in the story to be able to reference other locations in the world, and therefore it's still in Procreate, I kind of drew the world map. So not only where my story began, which is a little bit here, but I kind of decided that I was going to really know for myself um, what the world actually looked like and what kind of creatures we could encounter in this story and where they were coming from, what continents, and so on. So it was important for me to kind of understand that side. Um, and then to address the issue with the quality or the loss of quality when zooming in into a raster file. Um, I looked around and kind of really understood that maybe vector, creating something in the vector would really be ideal because then I could zoom in as much as I could and it would never lose quality because vectors, of course, are not rasterized files, mathematically produced lines. And my challenge was how did I transcribe everything that I've created so far into a new program? Of course, with Procreate, it's a little bit more artistic because you can have a little bit more free flowing mindset in terms of what you're painting and what brushes you're using. Whilst in Adobe Illustrator, you have to plan ahead and plan throughout how you're going to achieve the visuals that you want, because obviously it's not the same kind of tool end result. So I had to kind of rethink that. But I decided that what I really wanted was to have something that would never lose any quality, no matter how much I would zoom in. So I went into Adobe Illustrator, and first of all, what I decided was I needed to create the set of brushes that I was going to use inside that tool that resembled the same type of brushes that I had in Procreate, so that I still had the same kind of concept, but I could create a visual that looked hand-drawn inside Procreate. So I designed a lot of different brushes, as you can see here. Some I started creating them in Procreate and then transferred it to Adobe Illustrator, and then with a mix of working in both, I made them usable inside Illustrator. So I decided that these were going to be my basic brushes for drawing cartoons, characters, locations. So these would be my basic brushes, and then I developed more brushes as I started kind of thinking about the map, just slowly about the map and there you go, and some textures that I also needed. So and then again inside Illustrator, I created more brushes that would help me then be very precise once I was recreating the map. And beyond that, of course, creating the characters and all the artwork that's going to be related to this fantasy story. Just the last one, which is the coastlines. So I designed the brushes for the coastlines as well. So a lot of detail went into it. And at the end, I ended up with having a set of brushes for myself that I could use in my story that was unique to me, and that I could really have something that was unique to my fantasy story. Right, so then I had to recreate everything inside Illustrator. So I started with having the map base with the latitude and longitude lines, similar to what we have on uh, maps from Earth. And then, recreated what I already had done inside Procreate, which is, it took me a long, long time because there's a lot of detail. So I recreated all the continents inside the map. Because the file is quite big, and I wanted to be able to zoom really into the detail, every single bit of the line that you see can be zoomed in, and it has a lot of detail. So it took me around maybe 2 or 3 days just to complete, all in all, the whole map. Then I added some color just to see, study what color could look like in my map. I didn't want it to look realistic like Earth. I wanted it to still look um, similar to cartography, ancient high fantasy cartography, but with a little bit of color and texture to it. Then I proceeded adding a little bit of erosion around my continents, which I really liked because it gave it a little bit of personality. Of course, I can, zoom in and see the detail the more I go into the coastline. But this is like an open map where you can see the whole of it rather than the detail. But the focus was to be able to create a map that it looks good from a glance, but also good once we zoom it. And this was allowed to me by utilizing Illustrator. Then I decided to create locators. So from a map, and obviously you're gonna have cities, we're gonna have landmarks, ruins, dungeons, mines, and I thought each locator needed to have its own identity while still, you know, looking uniform. Um, you could still look at it and see that it's part of the same concept. And again, it was really, really fun to do the locators. I might do some more as I develop them up more, but so far these are all I have. And this is it. And I added the wording, of course, for my map. I already know the names of all the continents and the seas, but obviously this is going to have to be saved for later. So in here you can see how it looks at the moment at this stage with the wording combined, um, and how I developed so far. So I've now done locators for cities and towns, and my next stage will be to add the ruins, the dungeons, the mines, every single other locator that's important to have in this map. This is again just for me, because obviously in the beginning of the story we don't have to know everything, but as long as I feel like I understand everything about the world, where everything is located, that's what's important for me. So yeah, um, this is it. This is my summary of where I am with the map. So if you see me again doing lives, working on my map, this is everything that happened until this moment in time. And then my future live streams will be the continuation of the current map situation. So thank you for spending this little bit with me, and come join me as I develop more detail into this fantasy map and also other aspects of this fantasy world. Hopefully you'll find this interesting content. I will definitely enjoy having your company, and for you to spend time with me. So thank you very much, and catch you soon. Bye.